1942, Germany. Orphans disappeared after singing in the night. It was a cold evening in 1942. Snow fell softly over the small German town, covering rooftops and cobblestones in a quiet white blanket. Inside the orphanage, children gathered in the dimly lit hall. Their small voices rose in song, a fragile sound against the dark of war creeping into every corner of their lives. For a moment, the world outside seemed far away. But that night, something was different. The music faltered. A sudden chill swept through the room, making the candle flames shiver. Eyes darted to the windows, where shadows seemed to stretch and twist like living things. The headmistress, Frau Weiss, frowned. She had felt it before, an unshakable sense that the night was watching. The children continued to sing, though a few began to tremble. Their harmonies carried through the hall, filling the air with innocence. Yet each note seemed to echo off the walls in a strange, hollow way. Then, as if someone had snuffed the sound, the voices stopped. A heavy silence fell, the kind of silence that presses on your chest and refuses to let go. No one saw the first disappearance. It happened while the children were washing up, their footsteps echoing down the narrow halls. When the headmistress called for them to return, 3 voices were missing. At first, she thought they were hiding, playing a cruel game. But as minutes stretched into an hour, a sinking dread took hold. One by one, the children vanished. It was not chaos. There were no screams, only the eerie, unnatural quiet of empty beds and chairs. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling shutters and sending dry leaves skittering across the frozen courtyard. The townspeople heard nothing at first, only the faint echo of a lullaby carried on the cold air. But soon whispers spread. Children had disappeared from the orphanage, right in the heart of winter. Frau Weiss searched room after room. She called names, checked closets, even the cellar, but found nothing. Only faint footprints in the snow outside, leading into the shadows of the forest that bordered the town. Snow had covered them quickly, leaving no trace. The sense of watching eyes never left her. She could feel them, those unseen forces that had claimed the children. Rumors began immediately. Some said the children had been taken by strangers, soldiers perhaps, looking for labor or worse. Others whispered darker possibilities, that the forest itself had swallowed them, alive because they had sung at the wrong hour. And yet, nobody dared venture too far to confirm. Neighbors reported hearing singing long after midnight, faint voices drifting from the orphanage toward the trees. Yet when anyone approached, the sound vanished. Those who claimed to see shadows moving in the snow described figures small and huddled, yet impossibly tall, as if stretched by the night. The town was gripped by a fear no one could name. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Fathers patrolled the streets, weapons in hand. And inside the orphanage, Frau Weiss sat alone, staring at empty cots, listening for the music that would never come again. That night marked the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt the town for decades. A night when innocence vanished, swallowed by shadows, leaving only silence, and a lingering echo of a song that would never end. After the first disappearances, the orphanage felt different. The walls themselves seemed heavier, as if they were holding their breath. Children who remained spoke in hushed tones, glancing over their shoulders at every flickering candle. Even the staff, hardened by years of war and hardship, admitted to feeling eyes watching them when no one was there. Strange things began almost immediately. Doors that had been locked were found wide open. Footsteps echoed through empty hallways. Whispered voices, soft and distant, drifted from rooms no one occupied. Sometimes, children reported seeing figures standing silently in corners, only to vanish when approached. One evening, little Emil, just 7 years old, came running to Frau Weiss. His eyes were wide, filled with a terror no child should know. "I saw them," he stammered. "The shadows. They are tall, and they move behind the walls." Frau Weiss tried to comfort him, but even she could feel the chill that clung to the hallways. Windows rattled, doors groaned, and the flickering candlelight cast shapes that seemed alive. Staff began to whisper of a presence that lingered long after the children vanished, an unseen watcher who moved with the night. Some nights, the children refused to sleep. They huddled together, singing quietly under their breaths, as if their voices could keep the darkness at bay. Yet, even then, shadows seemed to creep closer, pooling in corners and stretching along the floors, shifting when no one looked directly at them. A young maid, Greta, claimed she saw something in the hall one night. A figure, tall and thin, with eyes glowing faintly in the candlelight. It didn't move like a human, more like smoke, slipping through the walls and melting into the floor. When she screamed, it vanished. No one believed her at first, but after the next disappearance, Greta's account was treated with uneasy silence. The shadows were not confined to the orphanage. Townspeople began reporting strange sightings near the gates, small shapes darting between buildings, always vanishing when approached. Sometimes, a faint lullaby floated on the wind, distant and broken, carrying a sorrow that chilled the soul. Frau Weiss tried to reassure the remaining children. "It's just your imagination," she said repeatedly, though her voice trembled. "It's just the wind, the snow, nothing more." But even she could feel the cold fingers of fear creeping in her heart, a fear that whispered the truth she dared not speak aloud. Something lived in the orphanage now, something patient and waiting. The local priest visited, blessing the hallways and rooms with holy water. He prayed long into the night, but the shadows did not retreat. The children's whispers grew desperate. "They're hungry," one said. "They want us to." No one understood what the child meant, but a shiver ran through the adults. By the third week, the orphanage felt abandoned, even with children still inside. Meals went untouched. Toys sat scattered in hallways, collecting frost from the winter air. And every night, the shadows shifted closer, a silent warning that the disappearances were far from over. Some claimed the orphanage itself had become a vessel for something older than the war, a darkness drawn to innocence and song. And when the children sang at night, they were calling it unknowingly into their lives. The town whispered of the cursed orphanage, but no one dared stay too long. Every window and doorway seemed to hold a secret, and the shadows watched, patient and endless, waiting for the next voice to rise in song. It began slowly, almost imperceptibly. One night, 2 children failed to return to their beds. At first, the headmistress thought they had wandered, hiding in some forgotten corner. But soon, it became clear that this was no accident. The disappearances followed a pattern, always at night, always after singing. By the third week, the orphanage had grown hollow. 10 children remained, but the fear was tangible, a living thing that crept into every corner. The remaining children clung to one another, whispering prayers under their breath, their small hands trembling as shadows danced along the walls. The townspeople grew aware when parents visiting nearby found their children missing. Panic spread like wildfire. Mothers wept openly, clutching empty coats and shoes. Fathers scoured the streets, calling names into the icy night. But the snow erased every footprint. The forest swallowed every trail. Frau Weiss tried to keep order, but the fear was contagious. One by one, she recounted the disappearances to the authorities, but war had the town's attention elsewhere. Soldiers patrolled the borders, rationing was strict, and the vanishing children were merely whispers on the wind. Reports went uninvestigated, dismissed as overactive imaginations. And yet, each night brought a new terror. A soft lullaby would drift from the orphanage into the freezing air, only to stop abruptly. A candle would flare and die, leaving rooms in darkness. Sometimes small cries could be heard, muffled as if coming from beneath the floorboards themselves. Children disappeared without a sound, leaving only tiny, frosted footprints that ended at the edge of the forest. No one returned to tell what happened, and each absence felt heavier than the last. Those who remained grew pale and silent, as if the life had been drained from their bodies with each lost friend. One night, a young boy named Hans tried to run. He had seen the shadows, felt their eyes, and begged to escape. But before he reached the courtyard, a cold hand seemed to brush against him. He froze, staring at the darkness, and then he was gone. Only the echo of his scream lingered, swallowed by the wind. The townspeople began locking their doors at night, but the orphanage remained untouched, a source of fear and fascination. Stories spread of children wandering into the forest, singing a song no adult could hear, and never returning. Even the bravest dared not venture near. As the disappearances continued, a grim truth settled in the hearts of the remaining children. The night was alive, and it had claimed their friends. The orphanage had become a threshold, and once a child stepped too far, there was no coming back. The fear was no longer of the soldiers, the war, or even hunger. It was the knowledge that the night itself could reach in and take the innocent, leaving silence, shadows, and an unbearable emptiness behind. By the time the fourth child disappeared, the town was in the grip of terror. Parents huddled indoors, keeping lights low and windows shuttered. Even in daylight, whispers carried on the wind, warning of the orphanage and the forest beyond. No one ventured near it unless absolutely necessary, and even then, hearts pounded in fear. The streets felt smaller, tighter, as if the snow itself conspired to close in around the town. Shopkeepers hurried their tasks, glancing over their shoulders at every passing shadow. Children walking to school were held tightly by their parents' hands, warned not to stray and never to answer the calls of strangers, or the soft, eerie singing that sometimes drifted from the orphanage in the night. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed the disappearances were the work of spies, agents of the war, taking advantage of the chaos. Others whispered darker stories, that the forest was cursed, or that the orphanage had been built on ground soaked with blood long ago. The older townspeople spoke of ancient evils, of spirits hungry for song and laughter. Fear transformed everyday life. People stopped gathering in the town square, stopped celebrating birthdays, stopped singing at all. Even the church, once filled with hymns, grew silent during evening prayers, as if the town collectively held its breath. Mothers told their children to whisper, not to call attention to themselves, and fathers patrolled the streets at night with whatever weapons they could find. Some brave souls tried to investigate. A few men ventured near the orphanage, searching the halls and the surrounding woods. They found only the frozen footprints of children disappearing into the darkness, and nothing else. The snow seemed to erase every clue, every trail. It was as if the night itself had swallowed the children whole. The terror became a constant presence, a living thing that seeped into every corner of life. Families avoided each other, sharing no news, fearing that even words might attract attention. Conversations turned to whispers. Laughter disappeared. The town no longer felt safe, even in daylight. And yet, every night, the orphanage remained at the center of the fear. Candlelight flickered behind its windows, and faint voices, soft and broken, could be heard. Some claimed they saw figures moving inside, tall and thin, barely human in shape. Others swore they heard children singing, a lullaby full of sadness and longing, but when anyone approached, the sound vanished. Fear had become a living, breathing entity. It was in the air, in the frost, in the shadows of the trees. And as the nights passed, the townspeople learned a terrible truth. Some things are more terrifying than death. Some things are silence, shadows, and the unknown. The town had been forever changed. What began as a small tragedy inside an orphanage had grown into a pervasive, unshakable dread. And deep inside the hearts of the people, the question remained, who, or what, would vanish next? Amid the growing fear, stories began to surface of a figure no one could explain. A stranger who appeared at the edge of the orphanage at night, always cloaked in shadows, never speaking, never fully seen. Townspeople described glimpses of him, tall, thin, moving like smoke through the snow, but every description differed. Some swore his eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Others claimed he had no face at all. It was on a bitterly cold evening that young Greta, the maid, reported seeing him close enough to touch. She had been carrying water to the children when she spotted the figure in the hall. Her candlelight flickered, and for a moment she swore he was standing just beyond the door. Her scream echoed through the orphanage. Yet by the time staff arrived, there was nothing, only the faint imprint of a footstep in the frost. No one could explain why the stranger appeared only at night, always near the children, always vanishing when anyone approached. Rumors spread that he was a harbinger of the disappearances, the shadow guiding the children into the forest. Others whispered that he was not a man at all, but a spirit drawn to their voices, feeding on their innocence. The remaining children spoke of him in terrified whispers. "He watches when we sing," little Emile said. "He waits in the dark. I can feel him." They refused to sleep alone, huddling together in the corner of their room. Even Frau Weiss, though she tried to reassure them, felt the weight of those unseen eyes. Something about the stranger carried the unmistakable sense of inevitability, like a storm coming too slowly to escape. Soldiers and authorities were called to investigate, but they found nothing. No prints, no footprints, no trace of anyone who could explain the vanishings. Only the children's belongings remained. Small shoes left at the edge of the forest, hats frozen in snow, blankets abandoned on beds. The stranger was never caught, never confronted, never identified. Town gossip transformed him into a legend. Some said he had always been there, a shadow among shadows, waiting for a night of song to claim his victims. Others claimed he was a spy or war agent, preying on the chaos. But the consistent detail, his presence before every disappearance, made the townspeople certain he was something else entirely. Something not meant to be understood. The children learned quickly to avoid his gaze. Even singing became dangerous. Yet the very act of stopping terrified them, because silence brought the shadows closer. And so, they sang in whispers, trembling, careful not to draw his attention, knowing that a single misstep could mean the same fate as their lost friends. By now, fear had mutated into obsession. Every night, townspeople peered through windows and over fences, hoping to catch a glimpse of the stranger. No one ever did, except the children. And every morning, the trail of vanished innocence grew longer, the mystery darker, and the shadow more terrifying. The orphanage was no longer merely a home. It was a stage, and the stranger was always watching, unseen, unstoppable, waiting for the next child to raise their voice. After several disappearances, strange messages began appearing. At first, they were dismissed as childish scribbles or mischief. But soon, it became clear these were no ordinary notes. They were from the children who had vanished, or at least that's what the townspeople feared. The first letter arrived in the mailbox of Frau Weiss. The handwriting was small, shaky, almost impossibly delicate for a child's hand. It read simply, "We are cold. We sing in the dark. Don't follow." No signature, no indication of who had written it, only an address scrawled in the corner, an old, abandoned building on the outskirts of the forest. Others followed. Notes slipped under doors, tied to fence posts, even left in the snow outside homes. Some contained nothing but tiny drawings, stick figures holding hands, a small candle, a shadowed figure looming over them. Each one carried the same haunting message, a warning or a plea, or perhaps both. The town was gripped by panic. Some thought the letters were a cruel joke. Others believed the children were alive, trapped somewhere unnatural, sending messages from the shadows. Searches were organized, but the forest swallowed every trail. The abandoned buildings mentioned in the notes were empty, decaying, filled only with frost and silence. One chilling discovery came when a local boy found a bundle of letters under a loose floorboard in the orphanage. They were all written in the same tiny, precise handwriting. One page read, He waits for us. He likes the songs. We must be quiet, but we remember you. Don't forget us. The message froze everyone who read it. Who was he? And why did the children speak of remembering their families as if they were already lost? The letters became a puzzle of fear. Some townspeople refused to read them, leaving them to pile in corners, untouched. Others obsessed over their meaning, poring over every word, every mark, every shadow in the ink. Patterns emerged, repeated words, phrases, and the same drawing of a figure, tall and dark, hovering over small, singing children. The letters were the only connection to the lost children. And yet, they offered no comfort, only a deeper sense of dread. With every note, the reality became clearer. The disappearances were not random. Someone, or something, was choosing, waiting, and watching. Frau Weiss held the letters close, reading them night after night. Sleep became impossible. Every creak in the hallway, every flicker of candlelight, every whisper of the wind seemed to echo the words, "We are here. We remember." He waits. And as winter deepened, the letters did not stop. They became proof that the children were gone, yet still present, trapped somewhere in the folds of shadow and silence, leaving behind a haunting reminder that some voices can never truly be silenced. Desperation had taken hold. Townspeople, authorities, even soldiers joined forces to find the missing children. Lanterns swung in the night, boots pressed into snow, rifles at the ready, voices shouting into the forest that seemed to swallow every sound. But each search ended the same way, empty-handed. They combed every building, every abandoned shed, every hidden cellar. They followed footprints that vanished into frozen fields, leading nowhere. Sometimes, searchers reported strange occurrences, fleeting shadows slipping between trees, a faint echo of children's singing drifting on the wind, only to disappear when they ran toward it. The forest became the focal point of terror. Its twisted branches seemed to reach for those who dared enter. Snow-covered paths concealed hidden hollows. Rocks and roots formed shapes that suggested movement when none existed. Search parties would find footprints leading into the dense woods, only for them to vanish without a trace. Authorities questioned the remaining children, hoping for a clue. But their memories were fragmented, haunted by shadows and fear. They whispered of a tall, dark figure that appeared at the edge of their vision, of hallways that stretched impossibly long, of doors that led to nothing but cold emptiness. One young boy, barely 10, spoke of a night when he had glimpsed the lost children far away, singing in a clearing illuminated by a pale, unnatural light. Their faces were pale, eyes empty, voices soft but hollow. When he tried to approach, the light disappeared, leaving only frost and silence. No matter how many times they returned, the forest and orphanage refused to give up their secrets. Horses and dogs tracked scents that led nowhere. Snow-covered footprints were erased by the wind almost as quickly as they were found. Despair settled over the searchers like a second winter, chilling their hearts more than the snow ever could. Some townspeople claimed the forest itself was alive, aware of the searchers' intentions, hiding the children from those who might bring them back. Others whispered that the stranger, seen by Greta and other children, guided the lost voices further into the darkness. Frau Weiss refused to leave the orphanage. She scoured every room, every attic, even digging into the frozen soil of the courtyard, but always came up empty. With each failed search, the feeling grew. The children were gone, yet not gone. Present, somewhere, watching, waiting, or trapped in a place that defied explanation. By the end of winter, the town had learned a brutal lesson. Some searches find nothing, because some things are not meant to be found. The missing children were a wound in the community, raw and unhealing, a mystery that swallowed hope and replaced it with endless questions. And in the orphanage, the shadows still moved, waiting for the next night, the next song, the next innocent to vanish. As the disappearances continued, fear twisted into legend. Every whispered story became more elaborate, every frightened gaze a spark for rumor. Some townspeople claimed the orphanage had always been cursed, built on ground soaked with blood from centuries past. Others said the forest was alive, a place where innocence was harvested for some unseen purpose. The children themselves added to the tales. They spoke of voices in the walls, of shadows that waited just beyond candlelight, of a figure that moved like smoke, tall and dark. Every account fed the growing panic, each story more impossible than the last. The town began to see shapes where none existed, movement in the snow, eyes glinting behind trees, faint singing carried on the wind. Parents refused to let their children outside after sunset. Those who had lost their sons or daughters avoided town altogether, retreating to safer villages. Even soldiers on patrol whispered to each other, reluctant to pass near the orphanage after dark. Fear had become contagious, infecting everyone, shaping reality into the shape of nightmares. Some claimed to hear the lost children's voices during storms. Lightning would flash, illuminating small figures in the forest or the orphanage courtyard, only for them to vanish the moment someone ran toward them. The wind carried fragmented songs, distorted and eerie, like echoes from another world. Local priests attempted blessings, processions, and prayers, but superstition had taken root. Villagers left charms at windows, hung protective herbs from doors, and drew strange symbols in snow and dirt. None of it worked. The disappearances continued, relentless, and a shadowy figure never failed to appear. Rumors grew more specific over time. Some said the children were taken by war spirits, lost souls seeking company. Others whispered of a man, or something like a man, who demanded the sound of singing and claimed the children for his dark purposes. With each retelling, the story became more terrifying, more inevitable. Even the remaining children began to believe. They huddled in corners, singing quietly, never lifting their voices fully. They spoke of the forest as if it were alive, breathing around them, listening, waiting. Every step outside the orphanage became a gamble. Every glance into the darkness, a potential invitation to vanish. The town, once alive with simple life, had become a place of shadows. Fear dictated behavior, rumors shaped decisions, and superstition replaced reason. And in every whispered tale, the truth remained constant. Something beyond understanding had claimed the children, and it was patient, silent, and watching still. Only a handful of children ever returned, or perhaps escaped from that long, frozen winter. Their memories were fragmented, like broken glass reflecting shadows. Faces haunted by what they had seen, voices trembling even in daylight. Each had a story, but none could fully explain what had happened. One girl, Margarethi, remembered the singing. How they had gathered that night, voices raised in innocent harmony, only for the shadows to come. It was like the night itself moved, she whispered years later. We ran, but it followed. I saw the others disappearing one by one, their voices still in my ears. A boy, Jacob, spoke of the forest. How it was alive with a cold, watching presence. I hid behind a tree, he said, and I saw them, the others, singing under the light, pale and silent. And then, nothing. The shadows closed in, and I ran. I didn't look back. Even the adults who survived, staff and townspeople alike, remembered the terror. Frau Weiss carried guilt to her grave, haunted by the empty cots and the letters from the lost. Soldiers recalled the endless snow, the tracks that led nowhere, the silence that pressed in heavier than any winter storm. The survivors' testimonies were chilling. They spoke of a figure that moved through walls, of hallways that stretched impossibly long, of whispers that promised safety yet led into darkness. Their stories never fully aligned. Some remembered music, others only shadows, but all agreed on one truth. The children who disappeared had been claimed by something beyond understanding. Decades later, the few who had seen it all could still feel the fear, a shadow clinging to the edge of their thoughts. Every song carried memory of that night. Every forest whispered warnings they could not unhear. And some nights, when the wind blew just right, they swore they heard singing in the distance, faint and broken, calling them back to a place they had survived, but only barely. The survivors became keepers of the story, the only witnesses to the horrors that no one else could explain. And in sharing their memories, they reminded the world of the children who vanished after singing in the night. Even now, long after the snow has melted and the orphanage has crumbled, the tale persists. A warning, a whisper, a shadow in memory. The voices of the lost remain, haunting, never fully silent. The orphanage no longer stands. Time, war, and decay have erased its walls, leaving only a memory buried beneath frost and soil. Yet the story of those vanished children endures, whispered from one generation to the next, a cautionary tale of fear, innocence, and shadows that hunger for song. The town itself changed. Streets that were once filled with laughter grew quiet. Families moved away, unable to shake the weight of that winter. Those who stayed avoided the old orphanage grounds, fearing that the darkness that had claimed the children still lingered. Even decades later, townspeople spoke of glimpses of figures in the snow or hearing faint, broken melodies carried on the wind. Historians would later record the disappearances as an unsolved mystery, a cold case of wartime chaos. But the locals knew the truth. It was more than war or misfortune. Something unnatural had taken the children, drawn to their voices, patient and relentless. The forest, the orphanage, the shadows, they were all part of a presence that no search, prayer, or protection could halt. For the survivors, the trauma never faded. Each song they heard reminded them of friends lost, of voices they would never hear again. Dreams were haunted by the tall, dark figure, by endless hallways and forests that swallowed children whole. Some dedicated their lives to telling the story, hoping to warn future generations of the dangers that lurk in silence and shadow. The letters, the rumors, the fleeting glimpses of shadows, they became symbols of memory. The town kept the story alive, a testament to the vanished, a warning to never ignore the unknown. In schools, families, and gatherings, the tale of the orphaned children who disappeared after singing in the night was told over and over, a haunting refrain. Even today, travelers passing through the town speak of a cold wind that carries faint singing, a chill that sinks deep into the bones. Some claim the voices of the lost children call out, not to scare, but to remind the living of the fragility of innocence and the darkness that can lie waiting in the quiet corners of the world. The legacy is simple, yet terrifying. Some voices vanish, but they leave an echo. Some disappearances remain unsolved, yet they shape lives and towns forever. And some nights, if the wind is right, you can hear them still, singing softly into the dark, a song of loss, fear, and memory that refuses to be forgotten. The lost children are gone, but their voices remain, haunting every shadow, every night, and every heart that dares to remember.